Hello, this is Mark Smith with Family Tree Counseling Associates, and the video I'm going to share with you today is entitled Hear No Evil, Say No Evil, See No Evil. I have a prop, which isn't like me in my videos, but I wanted to share with you this little statuette, and I've had this in my life for as long as I can remember. This little group of monkeys, I first remember perched on my grandmother's very fancy credenza. And my grandparents were good people. They were successful. They owned 3 clothing stores in our little town. But my mother and her large brood of 6 children, we were what I call food stamp and free lunch program poor. My grandparents lived in a very beautiful home, and I associate everything in it with class and wealth, and for the most part, really good memories. But it seems true to me that this little statuette of my grandmother's little monkeys represented her way of living with my grandfather. My grandfather was a good man. He was a hard worker. He was from a large Catholic Dutch family, but he had a temper issue, and his rage was really hair trigger, and I believe he had strong negative feelings toward my mother because she was the child of another man, and that was the big family secret in our family. And my grandfather tried to invest in us as grandchildren, but he had a couple of us that he really liked. I wasn't one of them. and most of us he sort of just tolerated. But if my grandmother had dared to stand up to my grandfather, I'm sure she would have ultimately been sent packing. My grandfather back then was my grandmother's security, her savior, her societal redemption. My grandmother grew up in an orphanage, and then when she was 19, really was taken advantage of by a fellow that she was babysitting in their home. And along came my mother, and a lot of shame and disgrace in the community, and Mom was also sent to an orphanage. And then came Allard into my grandmother's life, and he wore a cool hat and could be dashing, and they built a life together. But it wasn't a life that didn't come with a price. But he really was her societal redemption of marriage, and then they couldn't have children, so my mom was it. So there was no way that my grandmother could dare punch this bully in his nose. Sadly, she sacrificed my mother to her husband's harsh control and his childish rage and his infantile jealousies. She chose to tune out his ugly, scarring words to my mother. She chose to not pipe up and advocate for my mother for fear that it would ruin her marriage. She closed her eyes to the strife and the damage that occurred in that fabricated family every single day. So my little monkeys, I'm at my office right now, and I keep these monkeys right over by the door, and they see everybody who comes in my office and everybody who leaves, and they have a pretty good view of every group therapy session and every couple an individual session. So they oversee the daily unmasking of family secrets, and terrified partners finally having the courage to name their truths. And they watch bullying being called onto the carpet, and bullies sort of punched in their nose by a pretty tough therapist guy, and addiction's name and unspeakable things spoken about. In my estimation, effective therapy is all about figuring out what is true, and then as the therapist to courageously name it in a way that hopefully both partners can choke it down. And if it stirs someone's fury, then so be it. But I wonder why, of all knickknacks and of all places, that I have my little guys right in the therapy room in clear view. It was unconscious on my part, I assure you. I wasn't trying to make a statement about my grandfather or my grandmother. It just struck me one day recently that it was ironic, because these little guys sit right here at the center of a lot of psychological unmasking. And it makes a lot of sense because my family has spawned a professional secret smasher, is really what a good therapist is. And my grandmother's fear-based qualities embodied in these monkeys have earned themselves a very honored place in the front row to see that action. What could be, might be, is the stone cold truth about your family of origin. Because you didn't grow up with Ozzie and Harriet, and you didn't grow up with Beaver Cleaver, and you didn't grow up with the Waltons. Your family, I assure you, has flaws, probably more than you know. What were they? And how did those flaws impact you as you were growing up? And how did they impact how you were loved and how you were wired to love romantically? The truth is that our sexuality gets calibrated by the wounds of our childhood. That's the great secret of understanding love. Who you're attracted to, your sexuality gets calibrated by the wounds of your childhood. However you're wounded, that's what you're going to be attracted to. So, what's the bottom line truth about you and about your marriage? How connected are you? How happy are you in your marriage? How much work have you gotten done? We all have blind spots. We all have dysfunction. We all have secrets. Marriages get better when everyone in the family is empowered to courageously tell their truths. Everyone sees, everyone hears, and everyone feels safe enough to say what they've seen and heard. I don't do a ton of family therapy, but what I've done, I've really enjoyed. Usually there's a teenager or two in the family who won't pull punches. They're angry, they're edgy, and they're very perceptive. If you think your children don't know what's going on in your family, you're sadly mistaken. Usually the kids know exactly what's going on. They listen, they take things in, excuse me, they observe, and they can name a lot of really powerful truth about your family system. Excuse me. Destinies of generations of people are determined by the insight and courage of the truth tellers in our families and in our societies. I'm sorry. I want to read that again. I had something go down the wrong pipe. Destinies of generations of people are determined by the insight and the courage of truth tellers in our families and in our societies. Families stay sick for generations when secrets are buried, truths are left untold, and dysfunction has a free and unchecked path. So, imagine, if you will, if back in the 1950s, when my mother was a girl growing up, actually the late 40s, early 50s, and let's say that there existed a therapy practice like Family Tree Counseling Associates, and that my grandmother marshaled enough anger to drag my grandfather in with my mother when she was a 12-year-old or 13-year-old. Wow. Back then, you bring a kid into a therapy office, and what would happen is the kid would be the patient. The kid would be seen as the problem, and the parents could basically dump the kid off for their therapy appointment and then pick them up later, because no one called the parenting into question. What we do here at Family Tree is we require the parents to be involved, and we do a family tree on them, and we find out how they hurt this kid, because the kid's not the problem. The kid's the symptom of the two architects and the system that they have built. So they could have brought my mother in years ago for being stubborn or angry or defiant or not a great Catholic, but it would have taken a therapist like me, if I could superimpose myself a couple generations later, probably about 3 minutes to get the measure of my grandfather, because I would have figured out that he was angry and know-it-all and counter-dependent and controlling and filled with rage. And I would have sought to engage him in a process of recovery. The most important person in a family like that is the codependent wife, the wife who's played the role of see no evil, say no evil, hear no evil, who has seen awful things but just cannot have a voice and cannot hold her husband accountable. We would take a codependent gal like that and we would empower her and help her to have higher self-esteem and help her to see that she's not been victimized. My grandmother wasn't victimized by my grandfather. There wasn't a victim and a bad guy. My grandmother, evidently, before she ended up in the orphanage, somewhere along the line, and I don't know where, there was some criticism, some control, some abuse, or some rage, or any combination of the above that caused her to need to marry a controlling, raging, critical man like my grandfather. So when we look at these family trees, we just figure it out. And what if my grandmother could have named in front of my mother and in front of a therapist and in front of my grandfather that my grandfather was a rager and a bully and a controller and an abuser? And what if he could hear that? And what if he got in recovery? And then everything would have been different. My mother would have felt heard and loved, and she would have been a lot less broken and angry in her own role as a parent. And then there's been 6 kids, and it's a pretty messed up bunch, me included, where there's been food addiction and rage and control and workaholism and underfunctioning and overfunctioning. We've had in our family system 4 or 5 people spend time in mental institutions. I wasn't one of them. I did spend a week at a treatment program, if that can count. We've had poverty. So we've had many divorces. We've had a lot of issues in my family system. But in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it says the sins of the fathers will be visited upon the children and upon the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Many times I'll get a new client in and we'll be unearthing their dysfunction that came from their family of origin. And they'll often say, well, we got to fix this in a hurry because I don't want to hurt the kids. And, the kids are 10 and 12. And I often say, too late. They're already hurt. They're already going to need to sit on somebody's therapy couch in their mid-30s to their mid-40s when their marriages blow up, because their marriages will blow up. Because they're going to grow up and pick you guys as their marital partners. And you all got a lot of issues. So we like to think that we can be brought up in horribly dysfunctional environments and through a good education and hard work and clean living and having a good job and a big house and a nice car and a pretty wife or a handsome husband, that we can produce happy, well-adjusted, healthy offspring. We cannot. We just hurt them in a different way because we have status and money than maybe your parents did who didn't have status and money. But recovery is a wonderful thing. It's simply knowing the truth about yourself and working very hard. I'm not faulting my grandparents for not doing the work. There was no place really for them to go to get the help that they needed. And I feel for my mother's pain that she went through. But I'm glad to come from the family that I did come from, because my family's dysfunction has allowed me to heal some things and learn some things that have been able to help people really all over the world. And we're just getting started with the books and the videos and reaching people all over the world. And it's a joy and it's a calling. But find out the truth about yourself. And to find out the truth about yourself, you got to find out the truth about the family you grew up in. That's where you're going to find the truth about you. Digging around in your sibling birth order, what happened in the childhood of your parents, what went on in the marriage, were there any family secrets, were there any addictions, was there any rage, were you abandoned as a child, do you suffer from shame? These are all questions that are very vital and important to figure out when you're figuring out who you are. When a marital couple comes in, we don't view it as marriage counseling. We view it as 2 people who are coming in, and we're assuming that they're on a search to find out who they are and where they came from, why they married who they married, and that they know, they really don't know this, but that we're going to teach them that their problem is not their spouse. In fact, the pain that their spouse has brought them is actually the cure. It's actually God's way or nature's way of breaking down their defenses so that they can become prepared and humble enough and teachable enough to sit in front of our counselors and get insight and get in recovery and break the cycle of dysfunction from one generation to the next. So I tell a new client who says, I don't want my kids to be harmed, I tell them, If your kids leave home healthier emotionally than you did, then you're a hero. And we really should throw a ticker tape parade for you. And I feel blessed that that's definitely true. In my case, my 3 kids, they're going to have issues. I keep telling them. I said, y'all are going to marry a combination between my worst faults and I don't think your mom has as many as I do, but her worst faults, and God help you, you know. And they keep saying, oh, Dad, that's a bunch of crap. But mark my words, you know, trouble's coming. But I do know this, that my kids are much healthier, light years healthier than I was when I left home. So pay attention to who you are and name truths in your family. And anyone who tells you who you are, no matter how much pain they cause you, they're your best friend in this world. And you should be so grateful for the pain they've caused you, because they are aiding you in fixing your life and impacting generations in a positive way. If you haven't joined our YouTube channel, we just went over 800 subscribers. And just this morning, we went over 100,000 views. That's not a lot of views for a movie star or a rock star, but it's pretty good for a bunch of therapists in Carmel, Indiana, and we're excited about it. So, also, I have books on abandonment issues and shame and affair recovery and counterdependence and marital issues at our website, familytreecounseling.com. Thank you so much for watching today, and God bless.